Welcome back to another Vox production. This video will cover Chapter 4 in the American Pageant, specifically from sections Frustrated Freeman and Bacon's Rebellion to Africans in America. As the 17th century went on, more and more freemen were frustrated at their lost hopes of acquiring land and marrying. This frustrated and impoverished group grew as the number of freemen began to increase rapidly in the colonies. In 1670, the Virginia Assembly disenfranchised landless freemen because they saw them as nothing but a burden to the colonies. Referred to in the name, Bacon's Rebellion was led by a planter named Nathaniel Bacon in 1676. Bacon guided thousands of angered frontiersmen into a rebellion that would change the nation for centuries to come. Frontiersmen were mad for two reasons. First being because of their lack of political power, as the House of Burgesses was dominated by the wealthy, and second, Virginia's Governor William Berkeley. Governor Berkeley proved his disloyalty and corruption to poor frontiersmen, as he valued his wealthy monopoly in the fur trade with the local Indians over his duty to protect the people of Virginia. For example, the Indians were attacking frontiersmen, but Governor Berkeley did nothing to protect the poor Virginians. As a result, the rebels attacked the Indians, chased Berkeley from Jamestown, and set fire to the capital in 1676. After Bacon's death from disease, the rebellion came to a close, and Berkeley returned to the colony and hung at least 20 rebels. Bacon's rebellion highlighted the tensions between the wealthy planters and the poor backcountry frontiersmen. After the rebellion, scared lordly planters took their eyes off of white indentured servants and shifted them towards Africa. The need for African slaves increased immensely due to the growing demand for crops and labor. You may be thinking, why didn't they enslave Native Americans? Well, the reason for that was because the natives could easily flee back to their homes, while Africans could not, as their home was separated by the Great Atlantic Ocean. The new thirst for African slaves in the 1680s was not only sparked by Bacon's rebellion, but also the rising wages in England, as it meant there would be less penniless people to become indentured servants. In 1698, the Royal African Company lost its crown-granted monopoly in the slave trade, and Americans began to participate in the cash business. Immediately in the next decade, 10,000 Africans populated America. The slave trade or triangular trade started mostly on the west coast of Africa. On the first leg, African coastal tribes traded slaves for European goods. On the second leg, also known as the Middle Passage, was where Africans were transported to America as slaves. Death rates on these African ships were about 20%. If they survived, they would be put on auction at ports such as Newport, Rhode Island, or Charleston. There in America, these African slaves would help in the production of the raw materials that would be sent back to Europe. At first, African immigrants gained enough freedom to become slave owners themselves, but threatened white colonists made sure that fewer Africans would have that opportunity as the century went on. Slave codes were the beginning of a long term of racial discrimination. The slave codes basically turned blacks into white masters' property. Most slaves held the country through low-status tasks instead of skilled ones. Specifically, in South Carolina, African slaves perished on the rice and indigo plantations due to the intense labor and the unhealthy climate. African slaves in the tobacco-growing Chesapeake region sustained better, as it was less physical labor and plantations were larger and closer to one another, which meant they would have better contact with friends and relatives. Female African slaves immigrated to the Chesapeake in 1720, boosting the population through natural reproduction instead of only new imports. Native-born African Americans contributed much to the American culture. Through the African-English hybrid language, Gullah, words such as voodoo, goober, and gumbo were absorbed into American speech. Slaves brought the West African religious dance, the ring shout, which held as the foundation of jazz. The popularly used banjo and bongo drums were African instruments. Although African slaves did revolt for freedom multiple times, they were still more manageable than the white indentured servants. Thank you.